Hi, Lao Tzu's back. He's gonna watch while I share a few passages from a really interesting book by a person who came after Lao Tzu. This one probably actually existed, something we're not sure we can say with any conviction about Lao Tzu himself. A man that the Chinese would call something like Zhuangzi, but I will refer to as Zhuangzi. Um, because that's as close as I can get. Zhuangzi is an old-fashioned English spelling and transliteration. These days we do it with a Z, Huangzi, but still something like Zhuangzi is what we're shooting for. But rather than annoy you and dislocate my tongue by trying to speak the language that I did not grow up speaking, I'm going to just do the best I can and refer to it as Zhuangzi and hope that that will do the trick. So I'm going to try and share my screen, and we're just going to share a few little passages. You'll notice that sometimes the passages seem to be in the first person, as Zhuangzi himself is talking, and other times they seem to be descriptions about Zhuangzi. Quite possibly, the book itself, like so many of these texts, is a composite. So it's often suggested that the first four or so chapters, the first 8 chapters, I think, called the inner chapters of the Zhuangzi, are thought to probably be by the historical figure whose book bears his name. The rest are probably but followers who just attributed the stories to their master. It's a common and very charming way of thinking or teachers that was practiced in the ancient world, both East and West. Pythagoreans also behave that way. So that's why we talk about the Pythagorean theorem and attribute it to Pythagoras. So quite likely Pythagoras himself was not the one that came up with that theory in the form that we know it. But anyway, that's neither here nor there. Why don't we take a few minutes and just delight ourselves by getting to meet, albeit briefly, very interesting, very amusing Chinese sage Zhuangzi. I'm going to share my screen. And I'm going to set this up as a slideshow from the beginning. I always seem to get messages coming in just when I'm about to get working. Okay, so his dates, we guess, circa about 365 to 290 BCE. And these are excerpts all from the inner chapters, even though sometimes here you will see Zhuangzi as being referred to in the third person too. So it's quite odd, but then what is it about this text? It's one of the more remarkably, I don't want to say psychedelic, philosophy texts you might come across. Really interesting, and I highly recommend that you check it out on your own. But we'll just look at a few little stories here to give you a taste of it, okay? This is perhaps the most famous episode in the whole text. Once I, Zhuangzi, that's his given family name, his given name and his family name, dreamt that I was a butterfly fluttering about happily. I did not know I was Zhou. Suddenly I woke, and there I was, Zhou again. I did not know whether it was Zhou dreaming he was a butterfly or a butterfly dreaming it was Zhou. Between a butterfly and Zhou, there must be a difference. This is called the transformation of things. It may remind some of you of the first section in Descartes' Meditations. You wouldn't be alone in being reminded of that. But I think there's some real differences here. Plus, Zhuangzi doesn't go to any great effort to allay his skepticism. Unlike Descartes, Zhuangzi seems to be quite happy in many ways, not knowing exactly who or where or what he may be. On ambition or on the prolonging of life. Particularly interesting one when you think about what this might have to say about our place in the world of men. It's one of the chapters in this one that puts it, in other words, in politics and in society, in civil society. So here's a story about him, by him. Once, goodness, Excuse me. Once Zhuangzi was fishing in the Ku River when the ruler of Chu sent two ministers with an invitation. I wish to trouble you with the charge of all the territories. Now, maybe real quickly, maybe I can point out that for a Chinese sage, this is the dream job offer of a lifetime. Um, there were so many of them, each with their own philosophy, it seems, who hoped to have a chance to put it into practice, which meant aligning yourself with someone in a position of power, such as the ruler of Chu. It's the sort of thing that Confucius himself never lived long enough to have happen. But it must have been his great dream. But here we see what Zhuangzi has to say about it. Zhuangzi continues to hold his fishing rod, and without looking around, he says, I've heard that in Chu there's a sacred tortoise which died 3,000 years ago. The ruler keeps it covered with cloth in a hamper in his ancestral palace. And what would you say the tortoise would have preferred? To die and leave its shell to be venerated, or to live on and keep dragging its tail through the mud? The ministers respond, and it would have preferred to live and drag its tail through the mud. Zhuangzi said, go your ways. I'll keep dragging my tail in the mud. End of story. Perhaps my favorite story of all in this text. I'm calling it an example of Wu Wei in action. You may remember that from the last micro lecture on the Tao Te Ching. It's a kind of spontaneous action or inaction action, non-action action that is the acme of behavior for a Taoist. So this is the story of Cook Ding. Cook Ding was cutting up an ox for the ruler of Wen Wei. And as he moved his hands, leaned forward with his shoulder, and pushed with his knee, the sound of flesh being cut, the knife slicing it were all in regular cadence, as in the dance of the mulberry grove, and the blended notes of Jingshou music. Ah, admirable, that your skill should become so consonant, the voice of the ruler of Wu Wei. Putting down his knife, the cook replied, what your servant loves is the approach of the Tao, more advanced than any skill. When I first began to cut up an ox, I saw it in its entirety. After 3 years, I ceased to see it as a whole. Now I work with my spirit, not my eyes. My senses no longer function, but my spirit moves freely. Following the natural forms, the knife slides through the large crevices and follows the big cavities just as they are, unless I avoid the sinews and the big moats. A good cook changes his knife once a year because he cuts. An average cook changes his knife once a month because he hacks. Now my knife has been used for 19 years. It's cut up several thousand oxen, and still its edge is as sharp as if it had just come from the whetstone. So there are spaces between the joints, while the blade of the knife has no thickness. When that which has no thickness is inserted in such spaces, there's ample room for the knife to move. That is why after 19 years, the edge of my knife is still sharp. Nevertheless, when I see a complicated part and see that it will be difficult, I proceed with care and caution. I keep my eyes steady and I move my hands slowly. And then with only a slight movement of the knife, the parts are rapidly separated and fall as clumps of earth to the ground. Standing up, I look all around and with satisfaction wipe the knife and put it away. Excellent, said Wen Wei. I've heard the words of Cook Ding and learned how to sustain life. Autumn floods. You see a little debate between Zhuangzi, Zhuangzi and one of his frequent interlocutors, a friend but competitor, I guess, called Weezy. Reputed to have been a logician, remember the school of names, as they say. So we're going to see a little bit of logic chopping going on here. Zhuangzi and Weezy were walking along the dam of the Hao River when Zhuangzi said, how the fish come to play. This is how fish enjoy themselves. Weezy said, you're not a fish. How do you know what fish enjoy? Zhuangzi replied, you're not I. How do you know that I don't know what fish enjoy? Weezy said, I am not you, and granted I do not fully know you, but I know you're not a fish, and that proves you do not know what fish really enjoy. Zhuangzi replied, let's return to the original question. You said to me, how do you know what fish enjoy? So you already knew that I knew it when you asked the question. I know what fish enjoy from enjoying wandering along the How River. Very odd story here. The death of chaos. The ruler of the South Sea was called Heedless. The ruler of the North Sea was called Sudden. And the ruler of the Central region was called Chaos. Kundun. Heedless and Sudden frequently met in the land of chaos, who treated them very well. Heedless and Sudden conferred how they would reciprocate his kindness. I think it's probably not a mistake that reciprocation is mentioned here. That's, of course, fundamental to Confucian ethics. All men have 7 openings for the purposes of seeing, hearing, eating, and breathing. 7. Chaos alone has none. Let us try to make them for him. Every day they dug one opening, and at the end of the 7th day, chaos died. Here's the tale. Zhuangzi's wife dies. Lugubrious little story here. When Zhuangzi's wife died, Weezy went to console him. Found him sitting on the ground, drumming on a wash tub, singing. Weezy said, when a wife has lived with her husband and raised children and then dies in her old age, not to mourn is already enough, but to drum on a basin and sing? Is this not going too far? Zhuangzi replied, not really. When she died, do you think it was possible for me to not grieve as everyone else? I pondered on the beginning of her existence, before she was born, when she had no life, and before that no bodily form, and before that no breath. From the conjunction of the indeterminate and the imperceptible, there arose a transforming power, and there was breath. This led to bodily form, and there emerged birth and life. And then there was a further transformation, and she's dead. These processes, like the cycle of the 4 seasons, follow one another. And now there she lies, sleeping in the great chamber between heaven and earth. If I were to mourn and grieve, it would indicate a failure to understand what is inevitable. Therefore, I restrained myself. Highest happiness. Uncle Malformed and Uncle Onefoot were traversing the hill of the departed in the wild of Kunlun, where the Yellow Emperor had remained. Suddenly a tumor began to appear on Uncle Onefoot's left elbow. He was startled and seemed to be disconcerted. Are you disturbed by this? Asked Uncle Malformed. No, replied Uncle Onefoot. Why should I be dismayed? Life is a borrowed thing. The living frame thus borrowed is but so much dust. Life and death are like day and night. You and I were observing the ways of transformation. If I'm undergoing a transformation, why should I be distressed? Here is the lesson.